Bertie Whitlow had learned to read silence like most people read street signs. At 31, she moved through the emergency department of Asheville General with a grace that looked effortless from the outside. Her brown curls were pinned back with a pencil, half on purpose, half out of habit, and her sneakers squeaked softly on the linoleum floors as she passed the nurse's station, clipboard in hand, heart on overdrive. It had been a brutal shift. 3 traumas before midnight. 1 stroke, 2 kids with RSV, 1 elderly woman who just wanted someone to hold her hand. And still somehow, Bertie hadn't sat down in nearly 6 hours. "Room 6 is calling for you again," said Annika, one of the night nurses, tapping a pen against the desk without looking up. "Of course they are," Bertie muttered, offering a tired smile. She pivoted, her movements precise, not robotic, just practiced, controlled. Bertie had long perfected the art of being steady when everything around her felt like it might break, and tonight things were breaking fast. A radio call blared through the overhead speaker. Stat emergency inbound. Male, no ID, severe blood loss, possible hypothermia, homeless. Bertie didn't blink. "Bay 3, she called. "Clear it." The doors slammed open minutes later. Cold wind rushed in with the stretcher, carrying a man wrapped in a shredded thermal blanket, his skin pale, lips tinged with blue. He was unconscious, chest barely rising. Blood soaked through gauze at his abdomen. He looked like someone who'd stopped expecting to be saved. "Vitals are tanking," the paramedic barked. "BP's dropping, 80 over 50. He's unresponsive, name's unknown. No wallet, no phone, nothing." "Blood type?" Bertie snapped, already slipping on gloves. "AB negative," the attending nurse called out from behind the screen. Bertie froze. A B negative. "Do we have any left?" asked the intern, frantically scanning the digital supply board. "Number last unit was used in OR an hour ago." That did it. Bertie stepped forward without thinking. "I'm AB negative." Everyone stopped. Annika turned slowly. "Bertie, I'm healthy, cleared, no meds. Draw from me now." "You sure?" the resident asked. "During your shift?" She didn't answer. She just nodded once and walked toward the transfusion bay. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from urgency. A man's life was slipping. She could feel it in the air. And she wasn't going to stand still while it happened. The needle slid into her arm. She winced, but didn't flinch. Blood filled the bag, red and fast, and she stared at it, her blood, this quiet, living thing that might carry someone back from the edge. Across the room, someone whispered, "He's probably just another addict." Bertie didn't react, but inside, something hardened. "Doesn't matter who he is," she said calmly. "Matters that he's here, and he's bleeding out." The nurse beside her didn't respond, just tightened the tubing and nodded. When the bag was full, they rushed it out of the room and into surgery. Bertie sat back for 20 minutes, drank water, let her legs stop shaking. She'd done her part. She could go home now. But she didn't. She walked down the corridor, past the surgical wing toward the chapel. It was empty. Dim light. Wooden pews. Quiet, save for the hum of the heater and her own uneven breath. Her phone buzzed. "Rosie. Still alive, B? Want me to bring you that terrible gas station tea you like?" Bertie smiled faintly, thumbs pausing over the keys. Bertie. "Donated blood mid-shift, might collapse." Rosie. "You better not. Who would annoy me with their optimism?" Bertie leaned her head back against the wall, closed her eyes. She thought about the man. She hadn't seen his face. Just skin gone pale, shoulders curled in like he was apologizing for taking up space. The way the medics handled him, like someone they'd seen before, forgotten before. She thought about how cold his hands were, and then, quietly, about the word he'd whispered once before he passed out. Ivy. A name. A thread. Back in the hallway, she saw the shelter logo on the clipboard attached to his stretcher record. Asheville First Light. Rosie's territory. She walked faster now. When she found Rosie seated behind a metal desk with a sandwich in hand and paperwork sprawled out in front of her, she didn't even say hello. "Hey," Bertie started. "That man they brought in tonight from the shelter. Can you check if there's a child listed under his case?" Rosie blinked. "You want me to dig through client files based on one ER case?" "He said a name, Ivy. That's all I have." Rosie narrowed her eyes. "Bertie, I know it's thin, but just check." Rosie stared at her, then slowly set the sandwich down. "You donated blood again, didn't you?" Bertie didn't answer. Rosie shook her head, half in admiration, half in exhausted concern. "You know," she said, walking toward the file cabinet, "you keep giving like the world's gonna stop spinning if you take a breath. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thoughts matter to me either way." Bertie leaned against the doorway. "Maybe it will." Rosie pulled a file out, scanned, then another, and paused. She held up a folder marked E. Hugo, unknown status/child, Ivy Ellis, 7. Bertie stared. "Hugo Ellis," Rosie said. "He's been at the shelter on and off. Keeps to himself. Doesn't talk. Never stays long. We figured..." "Well?" "Figured what?" "That he was one of the ones you can't reach. Too far gone. Too quiet. I didn't even know he had a kid. Never mentioned her. Not once." Bertie reached for the file. Inside was a drawing. A little girl's handwriting scrawled at the bottom. "Me and Daddy in the cabin. One day we'll go back." Bertie held it like it might shatter. She whispered, "She's waiting for him." Rosie watched her carefully. "You know this isn't your responsibility." Bertie looked up. "No," she said softly, "but it might be my second chance to get it right." Rosie didn't argue. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something was beginning. Not loud, not obvious. Just the first pulse of a story that hadn't ended after all. The ICU lights always felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Maybe it was the sterile brightness, or maybe it was the silence, the kind that didn't hum with life, but held its breath, waiting to see who would make it through the night. Bertie stood outside room 14, arms crossed over her scrub top, watching the man through the narrow window. Hugo Ellis. According to the file Rosie had let her see, he was 39. No known medical history. No emergency contacts. Technically, no address. But someone had written the name Ivy in the corner of the intake form. A quiet clue no one had noticed, except her. He looked different in the light. Still pale, still thin, but not fragile. There was something about the way his hands rested, strong, relaxed, like someone who'd once been used to control. His beard was rough but clean. His features were not what she expected. She didn't know why she expected someone older, or harder, or broken in a way that showed more on the outside. But Hugo didn't look broken. He looked paused. She stepped into the room. The monitor beeped steady. The IV drip ticked. Outside the window, Asheville's skyline flickered against a gray morning sky. "Mr. Ellis?" she said softly. No response. She moved closer. He was awake, barely. His eyes fluttered open, lids heavy. Hazel, she thought. Or green. It was hard to tell in the light. "You're in the hospital," she continued gently. "You had a bad fall. Some internal bleeding. We had to get you into surgery fast." He blinked slowly. His lips parted like he might speak, but nothing came out. "I'm Bertie. I'm one of the nurses who helped take care of you." Still nothing. She offered a small smile. "You said a name, Ivy. Is that someone I should call?" His eyes flickered then. A pause, a catch in his breath. Bertie leaned closer. Ivy, is she your daughter? Hugo's gaze turned toward the ceiling. One word, barely above a whisper. She's everything. Bertie swallowed hard. She watched his eyes begin to gloss over again, sleep taking him before she could ask anything more. When she stepped back out into the hallway, Dr. Lena Marks was waiting. Got a minute? Lena asked, already turning. Bertie followed. Down the corridor, around the corner, into the staff lounge. The door clicked shut behind them. Lena didn't sit. I heard what you did last night. Bertie raised a brow. What exactly? You donated blood, during shift hours. Without clearance, Bertie didn't flinch. We were out of AB negative. He was crashing. That's not the point. It is to me. Lena exhaled, folding her arms. Bertie, this isn't about policy. It's about boundaries. You can't keep crossing lines and pretending it's standard care. Bertie said nothing. Lena softened, but only slightly. I know your heart's in the right place, but you've been giving so much for so long. I'm not sure there's anything left for you. Bertie's voice was low. Then maybe I'm not the one who needs the reminder. Lena's jaw tensed. Be careful. Bertie left without replying. By the time she got to the nurse's station, Rosie was already there, sipping from a massive thermos with stickers peeling off the side. Well, Rosie said, not even looking up. I heard the Queen of Ice just gave you the don't feel too much talk. Bertie collapsed into the chair beside her. Do you ever get tired of being right? Never. What did she say? That I'm bleeding too much into the job. Rosie raised a brow. Kind of poetic, considering. Bertie didn't laugh. Rosie turned her head. Hey. Bertie finally looked at her. You know the difference between caring and carrying, right? Bertie leaned back, closed her eyes for a beat. No, she said quietly. Not really. Rosie sighed. Then maybe it's time you learn. Later that evening, Bertie walked through the front doors of the Asheville First Light Shelter. The receptionist barely glanced up. Nurses' outreach kits in the back storage, she said, assuming the visit was routine. Bertie nodded and kept walking. She found Reverend Mason in his office, hunched over a stack of grant paperwork. He looked up. You look like you haven't slept. She smiled faintly. I haven't. Can I talk to you? Of course. They sat across from each other, a cheap lamp casting gold across the desk. I've been treating someone, Bertie began. He was brought in yesterday, no ID at first, homeless. But his name's Hugo Ellis. Mason didn't react. He said the name Ivy, she continued. Turns out he's got a daughter, 7 years old. In the system. Now Mason blinked. Ivy, he repeated. Good Lord. You know him. Mason nodded slowly. He's come in and out for months. Doesn't talk much. Fixes things when he's here. Good with tools. Never asks for anything. Do you know his story? Mason looked down at his hands. Only what he never says. Bertie leaned in. What do you mean? Mason sighed. He carries the weight of someone who's lost more than most, but he doesn't wear it loud. He wears it like a coat that never comes off. Bertie's voice softened. Why didn't anyone help him? We tried, but you can't force someone to come back from something if they're not ready. Bertie stared at the corner of the desk where a small, crooked wooden figurine sat, hand-carved. A fox. Did he make that? Mason nodded. She swallowed. He's not what people think when they hear homeless, she said. Mason met her eyes. They rarely are. Outside, the wind picked up again. Bertie stood to leave, but paused at the door. If he makes it, she said, if he gets through this, do you think he'll want her back? Ivy? Mason didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, I think he never stopped wanting her. I just don't think he believed he deserved her. Bertie stepped out into the night. The wind hit her face, crisp and sharp. She looked up at the sky, and somewhere in that stillness, something settled. This wasn't just a patient. This was a man clawing his way back to something he thought he'd lost forever. And Bertie, somehow, had just handed him the first thread. The next morning, sunlight crawled reluctantly through the hospital windows, spilling across white floors and pale walls that had already seen too much. Bertie stood by the nurse's station, eyes fixed on her patient list, but her thoughts were far from her chart. Room 14, Hugo Ellis. He'd been stable overnight. That was something. But it wasn't what kept her pulse oddly tight. It was the memory of the way he said her name, Ivy, like it was a thread keeping him stitched to this world, like letting it go might unravel him completely. "Bertie," came a clipped voice from behind her. "Dr. Lena Marks." Bertie turned. "We've got a call. Someone from social services wants to speak to the attending nurse who's been overseeing Hugo Ellis's care. Apparently, you've flagged his chart with a child of interest note." Bertie hesitated. "I added it after verifying his connection to Ivy Ellis through shelter records. It's appropriate." Lena's brow lifted. "It's not standard protocol to do that without documentation." "I spoke with Reverend Mason. I've seen the shelter files. That's not the point." Bertie's lips pressed into a line. Lena stepped closer, voice lower now. "You need to remember, Bertie, you're not a caseworker. You're not a guardian. You're a nurse." Bertie didn't flinch. "And a man almost died in our ER with no voice to advocate for him. Now we know he has a child. That matters." Lena sighed, then nodded once. "Just keep things clean. No emotional involvement." But Bertie was already walking away. Clean didn't save people. Sometimes compassion did. She made her way down the hall and stepped into Hugo's room. His eyes were open this time, duller than she remembered, but awake. "You made it through the night," she said, voice light. He turned his head slowly. "Doesn't feel like it." She moved closer, checking the IV, the monitors, the chart. "No fever. Numbers look better." "Didn't expect to wake up," he said quietly. Bertie paused, her hand stilling on the side rail. "Most people don't. When they do, there's usually a reason." He looked at her then, really looked. "I know your voice," he said after a moment, "from the blood room." Bertie blinked. "You were the one who donated." She nodded once. "We were out of AB negative. There wasn't time." His jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have done that. It's your job to stay safe." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's my job to risk something small so someone else doesn't lose everything." He looked away. There was silence between them. Not awkward, just full. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. "You said Ivy's your daughter." His eyes flickered, then closed. "Yeah." "She's in the system now," Bertie said gently. "Temporary foster care. She's okay, but waiting." Hugo's throat moved as he swallowed. "She shouldn't have to wait. Not because of me." Bertie leaned forward. "Why did you leave?" He opened his eyes. Didn't answer right away. "I lost my wife," he said finally. 2 years ago, cancer. She was the planner, the strong one. I wasn't ready. Ivy was 5. She looked up at me like I had the answers, and all I had was grief." Bertie felt the weight of those words settle in the room. "I tried to hold on," he continued, "but I was drowning in everything. Guilt, money, decisions, family pressure. And then I just disappeared, walked away from all of it." Bertie blinked slowly. "So you gave up?" "No," he said, almost whispering. "I broke." She let that sit. Then softly, "She's still drawing pictures of the cabin, the one you two used to visit. She believes you're coming back." He looked at her sharply, pain written in every line of his face. "I don't deserve that kind of hope." "Maybe not," she said, "but it's there. So what you do now, it matters." He didn't respond. She stood, smoothing down her scrub top. "I'll let the caseworker know you're stable enough for a supervised visit if that's something you want." "Are you always like this?" he asked. She turned back. "Like what?" "Pushing people back toward the fire when all they want is to stay out of the smoke." Bertie's expression softened. "Only when I think there's still something burning in them worth saving." He looked at her for a long moment. And for the first time since she'd met him, something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth, not relief, but recognition, the start of something unspoken. By the time she left the room, Rosie was waiting near the vending machine, arms crossed. "You've got that face again," Rosie said. "What face?" "The, I'm about to do something that feels like the right thing but is probably against policy face." Bertie leaned her back against the wall. He remembers her, and he regrets everything. That counts for something. Rosie handed her a granola bar. "Regret's only step one. You can't rebuild a life on it." Bertie opened the wrapper slowly. "I'm not trying to rebuild him. I'm just giving him a chance." Rosie tilted her head. "You think he's the kind of man who could come back from this?" Bertie thought about his eyes, the way they darkened at Ivy's name, the ache in his voice when he said he'd broken. "I don't know," she said. "But I think, if anyone could, it'd be him." Rosie looked at her carefully. "You like him?" Bertie froze mid-chew. "I don't even know him." "Not yet," Rosie said, "but you're letting him matter." Bertie didn't argue. In the distance, an intercom called for a transfer. The day marched forward. But in room 14 behind the glass, a man was trying to remember what it felt like to want something again. And Bertie, without meaning to, was giving him a reason to try. Bertie stood at the edge of the playground, hands tucked into her coat pockets, breath catching on the crisp mountain air. Her day off had begun with a plan: laundry, groceries, sleep. But here she was, watching a group of kids run wild through the little park tucked behind the Asheville Public Library. She spotted her immediately. Ivy, 7 years old, a little smaller than the others, her coat too big, sleeves brushing past her fingers. She wore boots 2 sizes up, one lace missing. But her laugh, light and clear, cut through the cold like a song. She was chasing a butterfly that didn't exist, arms outstretched, joy etched into every clumsy step. Bertie had coordinated the visit quietly, through Rosie, through a friend at family support. Just an off-the-record wellness check, she'd said. Nothing official. Ivy's temporary foster guardian, a kind woman named Mrs. Hensley, sat on a nearby bench, knitting. Bertie walked over slowly. "She always this light on her feet?" Bertie asked. Mrs. Hensley smiled without looking up. "She dances even when there's no music. Says her dad used to play old records in the cabin." Bertie's chest pinched. "Has she said much about him?" "Only every day." Mrs. Hensley looked up then. "Wants to know if he's still fixing things. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thoughts matter to me either way. If he remembers how to carve wooden animals? If he'll come get her when the trees turn green again?" Bertie swallowed. "And what do you tell her?" "The truth." She paused. "That some people need a little more time to find their way back." Bertie nodded, but her stomach twisted. A squeal rang out. Ivy had climbed to the top of the jungle gym and was waving something in her hand. Bertie walked closer, knelt as the little girl slid down the plastic tunnel, and landed in front of her, grinning. "I caught one," Ivy said, holding up a crumpled leaf. Bertie smiled. "That's a very sneaky butterfly." Ivy's head tilted. You're not from school. Nope, I'm a nurse. Are you the kind that gives shots? Only when I have to. Ivy studied her. You don't look mean. Bertie laughed. I try not to be. They sat together on the cold rubber ground, Ivy still holding her leaf-like treasure. My daddy used to make things, Ivy said suddenly. Little animals from wood. He carved a fox once, just like the one in my dream. Bertie nodded slowly. Do you miss him? I don't remember what his voice sounds like. Her gaze drifted. But I think about him a lot. If I try hard, I can still smell the soap he used. Bertie blinked against the sting behind her eyes. Do you think he thinks about you? Ivy looked up. Yes? Why? Because I'm his favorite thing. Bertie's breath caught. Out of the mouths of children, truth arrived like lightning. They sat in silence for a few beats. Then Ivy pulled something from her coat pocket, a small notebook, worn at the edges. She opened it to a page with a shaky drawing of a house with trees, a girl and a man with big hands and curly hair. That's us, Ivy said. At the cabin. Bertie looked closer. What's that in his hand? A heart, Ivy whispered. He said he carved it for Mama once, but he never got to finish it. Bertie sat back, her heart twisting with something she couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or longing, or the unbearable heaviness of knowing too much, too soon. That night after dinner, she returned to the hospital. The halls were quieter, the shift change lulling everything into its briefest stillness. She pushed open the door to room 14. Hugo was sitting up for the first time, arms resting across his lap, face pale but sharper. The window beside him was fogged, the outside world a smear of blues and grays. You look better, she said softly. He looked over. Lying to patients now? She smiled. Just trying to keep up morale. He nodded toward the chair. You always stop in on your days off? Only for the good cases. He raised an eyebrow. So I'm a case. She hesitated. You're something. There was a pause. The air between them thickened. I saw her today, Bertie said quietly. His head snapped toward her. Ivy? She's okay. She's in good hands. But she talks about you a lot. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say to her. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You don't have to say much, Bertie replied. She already believes you're coming back. A long silence followed, the kind that filled every corner of a room. I lost everything, Hugo said finally. The business, the house, my wife, and then I let go of her too. I told myself she'd be better off, with someone stable, someone who wasn't waking up in a cold sweat forgetting what day it was. Bertie's voice was soft. You were grieving. No, he said. I was disappearing. She looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who had once been someone powerful, someone loved, someone trusted, and now was learning how to be all of those things again without knowing if he deserved it. She made you a drawing, Bertie said. You're holding a heart in it. Hugo blinked. His throat worked to swallow something. She remembers, she added. Even when you don't think you're worth remembering. He leaned forward slightly. Why are you doing this? She tilted her head. Doing what? Caring. Bertie's breath caught, and for the first time, the truth slipped out without her planning it. Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love and not get the chance to fix it. He met her eyes. Steady. Honest. What happened? He asked. She hesitated, then answered, voice just above a whisper. My mother died in this hospital. Alone. Because I was too late getting back from a shift. I told myself I was helping someone else. That she'd be fine. That she knew I loved her, but I don't know if that was true. Hugo looked down. That's why you stayed when I came in? That's why I couldn't walk away." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, soft flakes. It painted the city in stillness. And inside room 14, two people who didn't know what they were to each other sat in the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of something quietly beginning. The next few days passed like breath held under water. Hugo's recovery was slow but steady. His color returned. His appetite crept back in timid waves. He started asking for real coffee instead of the weak hospital brew. But more than his body healing, it was something else Bertie noticed: the shift in his gaze. The way he started looking outward instead of just surviving inward. Bertie brought him books, quiet ones. No thrillers, no chaos. Just soft, still stories about cabins and gardens and broken things made whole. He devoured them, page by page, like someone relearning how to sit with themselves. On Thursday morning, he asked her something unexpected. "Do you still dream about her?" he said, his voice low, breaking the quiet as she checked the monitors. Bertie glanced up. "My mom?" He nodded. She swallowed. "Sometimes, but it's not the same as it used to be. At first I dreamed of the hospital room, the silence, the empty chair beside her bed. It used to gut me." Her fingers tightened on the clipboard. "Now, it's mostly memories. Her humming while folding towels, the way she'd trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep." Hugo's eyes were steady. "You speak like someone who hasn't forgiven herself yet." Bertie didn't answer at first. "I don't think I have," she said finally. "Not fully." Silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then softly, Hugo said, "I haven't either." Bertie sat down, not because she needed to, but because it felt like a moment that needed both feet on the ground. "Tell me," she said. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then his voice found a rhythm, slow, uncertain, honest. "My wife, Lauren, she was the one who made things feel steady. We were never extravagant. Just a cabin outside Weaverville, a small tech consultancy I ran from home. She taught music at the community college." He paused. His eyes flickered to the window, as if he could still see her there somehow, somewhere in the snow. She found the lump during a summer hike. She thought it was nothing. But it wasn't. Bertie watched his hands, the way they twitched when he said the word lump. "She was brave, stronger than I knew how to be. I thought I had more time." Hugo's voice cracked just slightly. "The day she passed, Ivy was sitting beside her bed playing with a doll Lauren had sewn by hand. I couldn't even hold it together. I walked outside, stood in the rain, didn't want Ivy to see me fall apart." His jaw tightened. "She saw anyway." Bertie closed her eyes for a beat. "She was 5. And I wasn't there. Not really. I checked out, kept the lights on for a while, made meals, did the routines. But I wasn't with her. Not where it mattered." He looked at her, voice barely a whisper. "One night she left a drawing on my pillow, me and her, holding hands in front of the cabin, and written above it, 'Come back, Daddy.'" Bertie's breath caught. "I left the next morning," Hugo said. "Dropped her off with Lauren's sister. Told myself she'd be better off. I left the drawing behind. I think about that every night." The emotion pressed into the room like fog. Bertie reached for the chair's armrest to ground herself. "She hasn't stopped drawing," she said quietly. "She carries that hope like it's stitched into her." Hugo's shoulders sagged. "She deserves better than a father who couldn't hold it together." "She deserves you," Bertie said, her voice firmer now. "Not perfect, not fixed, just present." Hugo didn't reply, but something in his silence felt closer to surrender than resistance. The next day, Rosie found Bertie in the cafeteria, stirring a lukewarm tea she had no intention of drinking. "You're deep in it now," Rosie said, dropping into the seat across from her. Bertie looked up, eyebrows raised. Rosie gestured with her coffee. The look, the distant stirring spoon stare. You care. I'm a nurse. No, Rosie said. You're Bertie. And when you care, you feel things so loud it echoes off the walls. Bertie exhaled. He's not what I thought. Rosie tilted her head. What did you think he'd be? Detached, maybe hardened. But he's not. He's grieving, gentle, tired. But there's still something in him that wants to come back. Rosie studied her a moment. And what about you? Bertie blinked. What do you mean? Do you want to come back? Bertie stilled. I'm not the one who disappeared. Rosie leaned in. Aren't you? Bertie looked away. Rosie softened. You're allowed to feel something real again, you know. You don't have to spend your life making up for not being there when your mother died. You already do enough. Bertie swallowed the lump rising in her throat. You think this is something real? She asked quietly. Rosie reached across the table, squeezing her hand. I think you wouldn't be this scared if it wasn't. That night, Bertie walked past Hugo's room again. Just a glance. Just a check. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting at the small tray table, pencil in hand, sketching something on the corner of a napkin. She knocked lightly. You're up late. He glanced over. Couldn't sleep. She stepped in. What are you drawing? He hesitated, then turned it toward her. It was rough but delicate. Two figures, small hands clasped, standing in front of a cabin. A tiny heart carved into the tree beside them. Bertie felt her throat tighten. It's not perfect, Hugo said quietly. She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. Neither are we. Their eyes met. No declarations, no grand gestures, just a silence full of something slow and undeniable, something real. And for the first time, it didn't feel like grief was the loudest thing in the room. The morning air hung low and wet, pressing fog across the Blue Ridge hills like a quilt that wouldn't lift. Bertie stood in the hallway outside Hugo's room, nursing a paper cup of tea that had gone cold before she'd taken the first sip. A nurse passed, nodded. She didn't move. Inside, Hugo was sitting upright, tracing over the same sketch from the night before. But something was different. His shoulders were straighter, his hands steadier. There was color in his face again. She knocked gently before walking in. Still working on your masterpiece? She asked. He smiled, small but real. Trying to add the trees. She pulled the chair closer to his bed. Need a critic? Hugo set the pencil down and looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Bertie, what happens next? She blinked. With what? With Ivy. With me. Do I get to try? His voice cracked slightly on that last word, and it caught her completely off guard. There was no arrogance in it, no entitlement. Just a man who was finally beginning to ask if he still belonged in a life he'd left behind. Bertie leaned forward. That depends. Are you ready to let her see you? I don't know. His hands tightened around the edge of the sketch. What if I let her down again? Then you try again. And again. Until she knows that this time you don't disappear. He looked down. What if I already did too much damage? She hasn't closed the door, Bertie said softly. And neither have you. He sat with that for a long beat. Then his eyes flicked toward her, a trace of hesitation in them. There's something I want to give her, but I don't know if it's mine to finish. Bertie frowned slightly. What is it? He reached into the drawer by his bedside and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside was a half-carved heart, notched at the corners, worn smooth from years of being carried. I started it before Lauren got sick, he said. It was going to be a locket. I wanted Ivy to have something that held both our fingerprints, but I never finished it. And after Lauren passed, I couldn't even look at it. Bertie took it carefully into her hands. It was light, but it felt heavier than stone. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's unfinished," he replied. "So are you." They both paused at the weight of that truth. Later that afternoon, Bertie found Rosie in the break room, flipping through intake folders between sips of coffee. "I need a favor," Bertie said. Rosie didn't even look up. Always dangerous words. "I want to schedule a meeting. Ivy and Hugo, a soft reunion. Nothing formal. Just something gentle." Rosie blinked and set her coffee down. "Bertie, that's a big ask. You know that." "I do, but I think he's ready, and she never stopped waiting." Rosie studied her. "You're not doing this to feel better about your own past, right?" Bertie hesitated. I'm doing it because I think this girl deserves to see that broken things can come back." Rosie sighed. "Let me talk to Mrs. Hensley and the caseworker. No promises." "Thank you." "I didn't say yes. But you didn't say no." A beat. Rosie smirked. "You're exhausting, you know that?" Bertie smiled. "I've heard worse." 3 days later, a soft spring breeze moved through the courtyard of the pediatric wing. The dogwood trees were just beginning to bloom, petals like tiny confessions drifting toward the ground. Bertie stood beside a shaded bench, heart in her throat. Across the way, Ivy walked beside Mrs. Hensley, gripping a small stuffed rabbit in her hands. Her eyes scanned the space with quiet curiosity until they landed on the man seated near the far end, nervous, still, clutching a box in his lap. Bertie bent down beside Ivy. "Do you remember what we talked about?" Ivy nodded. "Be brave. And? Just look." Bertie gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You ready?" Ivy nodded again. She crossed the space slowly, the weight of 7 years and 1 heartbeat pulling her forward. Hugo stood as she approached, his eyes wide and wet but full of something Bertie hadn't seen in him before. Pure, radiant fear. Not of her, of not being enough for her. Ivy stopped a few feet away. Hugo knelt, held out the box. "I made something for you," he said, voice shaking. She didn't take it at first. "I used to be scared," she said, "that you forgot how to find me." He swallowed. "I was scared too." "Are you still?" He nodded. "But I'm more scared of never getting to say I'm sorry." Ivy blinked, her little chin trembling. Then she took the box. Inside was the heart, now finished, polished, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. He whispered, "I never stopped loving you. I just stopped knowing how." She leaned in then, not with words, but with arms thrown around his neck so tight he gasped. Bertie looked away, tears blurring the blooming trees. Rosie appeared beside her a moment later, quiet. "You did good, Bea." Bertie shook her head. They did good. As Hugo stood, Ivy's hand in his, he looked across the courtyard at Bertie. Just a glance. But it held something rare and delicate. Gratitude. Recognition. A silent, slow-opening kind of affection. And in that quiet spring air, something more than a family began to form again. Something like a future. The wind had picked up by the time Bertie left the hospital that evening, tugging at her coat and stirring loose petals along the sidewalk, like a gentle reminder that even beauty doesn't always stay where you leave it. She walked slower than usual, letting her thoughts stretch out in the spaces between her steps. The image of Ivy wrapped around Hugo's neck, her tiny arms clinging like she remembered how it felt. It hadn't left her. It probably wouldn't for a long while. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Rosie. You okay? Want Thai or silence?" Bertie smiled faintly, thumb hovering. "Both." "Got it. Mushu and Zero Expectations coming in 20. She tucked her phone away and kept walking, her boots clicking softly against the wet sidewalk. Asheville's spring evenings always carried that faint mountain chill, the kind that made you feel small but alive. She reached her apartment, climbed the stairs, and unlocked the door. The familiar creak greeting her like an old friend. The inside smelled like lavender and lemon cleaner, which only reminded her how much she hadn't been home. Her plants leaned against the light like they were waiting for her to remember them. Bertie dropped her keys into the bowl by the door, slipped off her shoes and let her shoulders fall. The quiet wasn't cold. It just echoed more than usual. 20 minutes later, Rosie walked in holding 2 takeout bags and a 6-pack of sparkling water balanced on her forearm. "I brought the fancy kind," Rosie said, nudging the door shut with her hip, "because emotions apparently require bubbles." Bertie cleared a space on the coffee table and motioned for her to sit. "I saw them," Rosie said as she unpacked the food. "In the courtyard. Ivy looked like someone just gave her back her favorite color." Bertie sat down slowly. She didn't hesitate. She just knew him. "She never stopped knowing him," Rosie replied. She was just waiting for him to believe he was still her dad. Bertie nodded, pushing rice around her plate. "He's trying. I can see it. But I don't know if he believes he deserves the chance." Rosie tilted her head. "And what do you believe?" Bertie looked up. "Do you think he can do it?" Rosie asked. "Actually stay? Actually show up this time?" Bertie hesitated. "I want to believe that. That's not what I asked." "I do believe it," Bertie said finally, "but I also know how fragile people are when they're trying to forgive themselves." Rosie leaned back on the couch. "So the question is, are you prepared to believe in him even if he doesn't believe in himself yet?" Bertie let the words settle. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm more afraid of what it means if I let myself be part of that belief." Rosie raised an eyebrow. "Because it's easier to save people than to stand still and let them love you back?" Bertie didn't answer. Rosie softened. "Bertie, you've spent your whole life holding broken things together. But this isn't about fixing Hugo. This is about letting yourself want something again." Bertie's throat tightened. "What if it's too soon? What if it's not?" Later that week, Bertie was standing at the nurse's station reviewing discharge notes when she heard the voice. "Is this a bad time?" She looked up. Hugo stood there in a clean button-down, hair combed, beard trimmed, still tired, still healing, but present. There was something new in his posture, tentative confidence, like he was learning how to stand in his own life again. She blinked. "You're not supposed to be up here without clearance." He smirked. "Reverend Mason cleared me. Said I had a reason." Bertie folded her arms. "This ought to be good." "I wanted to say thank you," he said, "for being there, for not walking away." She stared at him. "That's not a favor. That's who I am." "I know," Hugo said, "but most people don't stay. You did." She looked down at her clipboard, then back up. "You're doing the work. That's what matters." He nodded, stepped closer. "There's something else." Bertie raised a brow. "I want to build something for her," he said, "for Ivy, something that lasts, and I was wondering if you'd help." "Help how?" "I have an idea, a bench, for the cabin, something we make together, with her." Bertie felt her breath catch, not because of the bench, but because of the we. It wasn't casual. It wasn't romantic either. It was something deeper, a bridge. "I don't know anything about woodworking," she said softly. "You know how to steady hands," Hugo replied. "That's all I need." Their eyes held. In the distance, a code call blared overhead, breaking the moment like glass shattering underwater. "I should get back," she whispered. He nodded, backing up a step. "Of course." but just as he turned, she said his name. Hugo. He looked back. Some things don't need to be fixed, just finished. His expression changed, just slightly, but she saw it, the flicker of hope trying to grow legs, and when he walked away, she didn't stop watching. Because for the first time, she wasn't wondering if she was falling. She was wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was ready to land. The sound of sanding filled the little garage behind Reverend Mason's shelter, the soft rasp of wood against grain like a lullaby for the hands. Bertie stood just outside the doorway, arms crossed, watching Hugo lean over a thick slab of pine. He was focused, steady in a way she hadn't seen before, not just surviving, not drifting, present. Ivy sat a few feet away on an overturned milk crate, holding a bundle of wildflowers she'd picked from the lot beside the shelter. She was humming under her breath, her feet swinging. Bertie stepped inside, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You're making progress." Hugo glanced up, smiling. "She picked the wood herself." Ivy nodded. It smelled the nicest. Bertie moved closer, fingers grazing the smooth edge. "It's going to be beautiful." He looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "It's not just a bench." "No? It's a promise." Ivy perked up. "To not leave again." Bertie's chest tightened. She looked between them, this man trying to rebuild a world, and this child who'd kept the blueprint in her heart all along. They worked together for the next hour. Ivy handed him sandpaper. Bertie held the legs in place as Hugo drilled. The air smelled like cedar and old sunlight. It wasn't perfect. The bench wobbled slightly. One corner wasn't flush, but it was theirs. Later, as the sun began to dip, painting gold across the concrete, Ivy lay curled on an old quilt in the corner of the garage, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm, fast asleep. Bertie and Hugo sat side by side on the new bench, their hands stained with sawdust and varnish. "I forgot how quiet peace could be," Hugo said softly. Bertie turned her head toward him. "Feels fragile, doesn't it?" "Yeah," he breathed. "Like if you speak too loud, it might scatter." A pause. Then, "You were right." "About what?" "Showing up, staying. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there even when it's hard." Bertie gave a soft smile. "You're learning." "I had a good teacher." She didn't respond. But something shifted between them again, a ripple beneath still water. Hugo exhaled, glancing down at his hands. "There's something I haven't told you?" Her gaze lifted. "Okay. My name, it's not just Hugo Ellis." He hesitated. "It's Hugo Markham Ellis. My name's still listed as a co-founder on a tech company out of Raleigh." Bertie's brow furrowed. "I left it all," he said. "After Lauren died. The company, the house, the accounts, just walked away." She blinked. "Wait, Markham Technologies?" He nodded once. Bertie sat back, stunned. "I read about the disappearance," she said slowly. "The founder who went off the grid. They said it was burnout, that he lost everything." He looked away. "I didn't lose it. I gave it up." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm not proud of it. But I can't build anything real, especially not with you, if I keep pretending I'm just a man who got lost in the woods." Her breath caught. "With me?" He turned to face her fully. "I know you didn't sign up for this, and I don't expect anything. But Bertie, you saw me when I didn't want to be seen, and you stayed anyway. That doesn't happen to me." She swallowed. "I don't care about your money, Hugo." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." They sat in silence, the weight of it folding around them like dusk. Bertie looked toward Ivy, still curled beneath the quilt. "She deserves a future that's stable, that's rooted." "I want to give her that," he said. "But I also want to earn it, not buy it, not fake it." Bertie turned her eyes back to him. Then keep showing up. That's the only blueprint that works. He nodded quietly. Then, softer still, and if I kept showing up? For you? She didn't answer at first. Instead, she reached for his hand, calloused, warm, real, and laced her fingers through his. You already are. The moment stretched, full of unsaid things. Hope. Fear. The cautious breath of something beginning. And somewhere between the scent of cedar and the sound of Ivy's gentle breathing, Bertie realized she wasn't standing on the edge anymore. She was stepping in. Bertie hadn't been expecting to see Casey Trent that morning. She'd barely poured her first cup of coffee when the clipboard landed hard on the nurse's station desk, and the unmistakable voice followed behind it. We need to talk, now. She looked up, blinking. Casey, in her usual no-nonsense blazer and sensible flats, already radiated storm energy. Her eyes were sharp, lips pressed in a line. Bertie straightened. Morning to you, too. Don't do that, Casey snapped. Don't go soft on this. I know what's going on. Bertie set her coffee down carefully. Then maybe talk to me like someone who also cares about that little girl. Casey didn't flinch. Ivy Ellis is under state custody, and I just got word that the man claiming to be her father, who until recently had no proof of income, residence, or stability, was found working in the back of a shelter. And now he's building benches and having unauthorized visits? They weren't unauthorized, Bertie said, voice tight. Rosie coordinated everything through the shelter board and Mrs. Hensley. The visit was supervised, not cleared through me, because you would have shut it down before you even listened. Casey took a slow breath, trying to tamp down whatever fire was bubbling beneath her calm. You think because he's changed a little that he's ready to raise a child again? He's not the man who walked away, Bertie said. Maybe not. But do you honestly think a few weeks of good behavior erases years of absence? He still hasn't filed a petition. No therapy on record. No clear housing plan. Bertie's heart pounded. He's doing the work. And you're too close to see how risky that is. A long pause hung between them. Then, softly, Casey added, Are you falling for him, Bertie? The question landed like a dropped plate, loud in the wrong kind of way. I care about what happens to him, Bertie said carefully. To Ivy. That's not a crime. No, Casey said, her voice gentler now. But it becomes a problem when your heart writes checks that reality can't cash. Bertie didn't respond. She didn't need to. Casey gave her one last look, grabbed her clipboard and walked away. Rosie appeared seconds later like she'd been hiding behind the coffee cart. Well, she muttered. That went predictably. Bertie exhaled slowly. She thinks I'm blinded. Rosie leaned against the desk. Are you? No, Bertie whispered, but I might be willing to see something she won't. Hope? Possibility. Rosie tilted her head. Bertie, what if this ends with heartbreak? Bertie turned, eyes steady. Then at least it ends knowing I tried. That someone tried. Later that afternoon she stopped by the shelter. Hugo was sanding another piece of wood near the back wall, sleeves rolled up, sawdust speckling his jeans. He looked up when he saw her, smiled, but it faded quickly when he caught her expression. What happened? Casey came by, Bertie said. She knows. Hugo's jaw clenched. Of course she does. She's going to push for an investigation, possibly limit contact until the state sees a viable family structure. So what? You mean Ivy could be moved? Bertie's silence was answer enough. Hugo sat down hard on the stool beside him, head in his hands. This is what I was afraid of, he muttered. That getting close would mean risking losing her all over again. Bertie crouched beside him, voice quiet. You were never going to be invisible forever, Hugo. I just wanted to be enough. You are. But you also have to prove it. Not with me. With the system. with the people who have the power to keep her or give her back. He looked at her, eyes raw. What if I don't check all the boxes? Bertie reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo Ivy had given her last week, her newest drawing. It was Hugo, Ivy, and Bertie standing side by side under the words, "Our home." "She already thinks you do." He took the paper carefully, hands trembling. "Then I guess I don't have a choice," he said quietly. "It's time to stop hiding." That night, Bertie returned home to find an envelope waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a note. "Bertie, if I'm going to fight for my daughter, I need to stop running from the world I left behind. I've made an appointment with the legal aid office. I'm going to start the process. But I want you to know something. If I hadn't met you, if you hadn't looked at me like I was still worth saving, I wouldn't have done any of it. You didn't just donate blood that day. You gave me a reason to wake up. And now, I'm finally ready to stand." Hugo Bertie sat on the steps of her apartment for a long time, letter pressed to her chest, heart wide open to the sky. She didn't know how this would unfold, didn't know if the system would bend, if the timing would hold, if love alone could outrun red tape and consequences. But she did know this. He was finally standing, and she wasn't standing alone. The bakery on Maple and 6th always smelled like cinnamon and morning, even in the late afternoon. Bertie stood in line, tapping her fingers against her phone, watching the woman behind the counter frost cupcakes with the precision of someone who believed details still mattered. She wasn't here for pastries. Hugo had texted earlier, "Meet me here. 4:15. I have something to show you." She glanced at the time. 4:16. Typical. He arrived a moment later, breathless, cheeks flushed from the spring wind, a folded envelope in hand. "You're late," Bertie teased as he approached. "I brought evidence," he said, holding up the envelope like it was sacred. They took a small table near the window. The street outside was busy with people leaving work, kids riding bikes, flower petals caught in gusts that danced along the pavement. Hugo slid the envelope across the table. "What is it?" she asked. "My first official step," he said. "Housing application filed, employment verification attached, legal representation confirmed, all of it." Bertie stared down at it, her heart thudding in quiet relief. "You're really doing this?" "I wasn't sure I could," he admitted, "but something changed." "What?" "You." Bertie looked up, startled. "You stood still when I couldn't, and that stillness made room for me to catch up." The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was charged, warm, heavy with everything unspoken. "I think I was afraid of hope," Hugo said softly, "because the last time I had it, it broke me." Bertie leaned forward, voice low. "Hope doesn't break you. It asks you to grow." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly what scares me." She reached across the table, brushing her fingers over his. "Then let it scare you, and do it anyway." They left the bakery just as the light began to turn golden, their steps unhurried, side by side. As they neared the shelter, a sound floated out from the courtyard. Laughter. Ivy. She was sitting on the bench they'd built, holding a paper crown made from folded menus. Reverend Mason sat beside her, nodding as she told him a story, probably one she was making up as she went. "Do you want to go over?" Bertie asked. Hugo hesitated. "Are you ready?" she added gently. He nodded but didn't move. "Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life from the outside. Like it's almost mine, but I can't quite touch it." Bertie turned to face him fully. "That's how healing feels at first. Awkward, undeserved, but it's still real." He looked down at his hands. "Do you think she'll forgive me completely?" "She already has," Bertie said. "What you're asking is if you'll ever forgive yourself." His breath caught. "Will I?" "I think," she said carefully. You're closer than you've ever been. They walked to the edge of the courtyard. Ivy looked up and lit up like a lantern. Daddy! Hugo crouched down, arms open, and she ran straight into him, crown nearly falling off her head. He held her tight, eyes closed, lips pressed to her hair like it grounded him. Bertie stood back, letting the moment stretch. Her chest ached in the best kind of way. Reverend Mason approached her, smile deepening the lines on his weathered face. You look like someone who's finally letting herself breathe. Bertie laughed softly. Maybe I am. He nodded toward Hugo. He's doing the hard work now. But don't think for a second your part was small. She looked over at them again. Father and daughter, their arms wrapped like they were afraid to let go. Sometimes, she said, all someone needs is one person to believe they're still worth showing up for. And sometimes, Mason added, that one person is enough to rewrite everything. As twilight folded over the mountains and the lights in the shelter flickered on one by one, Bertie felt the shift. Not a grand event, not a thunderclap, but a soft turning. Something old was ending, and something entirely new was beginning. Not perfect, but whole in its own way. The bakery on Maple and 6th always smelled like cinnamon and morning, even in the late afternoon. Bertie stood in line, tapping her fingers against her phone, watching the woman behind the counter frost cupcakes with the precision of someone who believed details still mattered. She wasn't here for pastries. Hugo had texted earlier. Meet me here, 4:15. I have something to show you. She glanced at the time. 4:16. Typical. He arrived a moment later, breathless, cheeks flushed from the spring wind, a folded envelope in hand. You're late, Bertie teased as he approached. I brought evidence, he said, holding up the envelope like it was sacred. They took a small table near the window. The street outside was busy with people leaving work, kids riding bikes, flower petals caught in gusts that danced along the pavement. Hugo slid the envelope across the table. What is it? She asked. My first official step, he said. Housing application filed, employment verification attached, legal representation confirmed, all of it. Bertie stared down at it, her heart thudding in quiet relief. You're really doing this. I wasn't sure I could, he admitted. But something changed. What? You. Bertie looked up, startled. You stood still when I couldn't, and that stillness made room for me to catch up. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was charged, warm, heavy with everything unspoken. I think I was afraid of hope, Hugo said softly, because the last time I had it, it broke me. Bertie leaned forward, voice low. Hope doesn't break you, it asks you to grow. He smiled faintly. That's exactly what scares me. She reached across the table, brushing her fingers over his. Then let it scare you, and do it anyway. They left the bakery just as the light began to turn golden, their steps unhurried side by side. As they neared the shelter, a sound floated out from the courtyard. Laughter. Ivy. She was sitting on the bench they'd built, holding a paper crown made from folded menus. Reverend Mason sat beside her, nodding as she told him a story, probably one she was making up as she went. Do you want to go over? Bertie asked. Hugo hesitated. Are you ready? She added gently. He nodded but didn't move. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life from the outside, like it's almost mine, but I can't quite touch it. Bertie turned to face him fully. That's how healing feels at first. Awkward, undeserved, but it's still real. He looked down at his hands. Do you think she'll forgive me completely? She already has, Bertie said. What you're asking is if you'll ever forgive yourself. His breath caught. Will I? I think, she said carefully, you're closer than you've ever been. They walked to the edge of the courtyard. Ivy looked up and lit up like a lantern. "Daddy!" Hugo crouched down, arms open, and she ran straight into him, crown nearly falling off her head. He held her tight, eyes closed, lips pressed to her hair like it grounded him. Bertie stood back, letting the moment stretch. Her chest ached in the best kind of way. Reverend Mason approached her, smile deepening the lines on his weathered face. "You look like someone who's finally letting herself breathe." Bertie laughed softly. "Maybe I am." He nodded toward Hugo. "He's doing the hard work now, but don't think for a second your part was small." She looked over at them again, father and daughter, their arms wrapped like they were afraid to let go. "Sometimes," she said, "all someone needs is one person to believe they're still worth showing up for." "And sometimes," Mason added, "that one person is enough to rewrite everything." As twilight folded over the mountains and the lights in the shelter flickered on one by one, Bertie felt the shift. Not a grand event, not a thunderclap, but a soft turning. Something old was ending, and something entirely new was beginning. Not perfect, but whole in its own way. The email came just after midnight. Bertie saw it when she rolled over in bed, groggy and blinking at her screen, expecting another shift schedule or an update from the nursing board. But this wasn't routine. It was from a state administrative account, flagged as urgent. Subject: Status update. Ivy Ellis, pending custody hearing. She sat up slowly, heart thudding in a familiar, unwelcome rhythm. Her eyes scanned the message once, then again. She didn't move for a long time. When she finally did, she picked up her phone and called Rosie. "You better be calling because there's a pastry emergency," Rosie mumbled. "They're expediting the hearing," Bertie said, voice tight. There was a pause on the other end. Then Rosie was fully awake. "What?" "They've moved it up. End of the week, Friday. Apparently someone higher up caught wind of Hugo's background. The tech company, the disappearance, everything. They're worried about public scrutiny." Rosie sighed. "They're going to make him prove more than just stability. They're going to make him justify his entire absence in front of a judge." Bertie's throat tightened. "He's not ready for that." "Maybe not," Rosie said. "But that doesn't mean he's not willing." Bertie didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, she was back at the shelter. Hugo was outside, helping install a rainwater system Reverend Mason had been talking about for years. His sleeves were rolled up, hands calloused, sweat clinging to his brow like effort was finally becoming second nature again. She didn't speak until he noticed her watching. "What's wrong?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "They moved the custody hearing," she said. "To Friday." He froze. Just a beat. But it was enough. "I figured they would eventually," he said quietly. "They're going to press you, Hugo. Hard. They'll question your past, your capacity. They'll hold up your disappearance like a mirror you can't look away from." "I know." Bertie stepped closer. "You don't have to do this alone." He looked at her, eyes tired but resolute. "I don't intend to." Later that day they sat in Reverend Mason's office. Rosie joined them, folder in hand, her energy sharp and focused. "You need character references," she said, flipping open the folder. "Letters, statements, any documentation that shows you're not just a reformed man but a consistent one." Hugo nodded slowly. "I can do that." "You'll need to talk about Lauren," Bertie added. "About why you left, why you're here now. No holding back." Hugo was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can make them believe I'm good enough." Rosie leaned in. "You don't have to be perfect, Hugo. You just have to be honest. Judges don't need saints. They need sincerity." He looked at Bertie then, like he was searching for something he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. "Will you be there?" Bertie didn't hesitate. "Front row." Friday came faster than any of them wanted. The courtroom was smaller than Hugo imagined. Wood-paneled walls, rows of pew-like benches, a simple desk, a judge who looked more tired than stern. Ivy wasn't there, too young for the tension of hearings, but her drawings had been submitted in evidence. The one with the cabin, the bench, the three of them. Bertie sat beside Rosie, heart pounding as Hugo took the stand. He spoke with care, each word pulled from somewhere deep. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving my daughter," he said. "I left because I didn't know how to survive the weight of losing her mother. I thought distance would protect her from my grief, but all it did was teach her how to live without me." The judge listened without interruption. "I've done the work," Hugo continued. "I've shown up. I've asked for help. And now I'm asking for one more chance. Not to erase the past, but to write something new." When he stepped down, Bertie could feel the energy shift. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Hugo exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. "That felt like walking across glass," he said. "You didn't flinch," Bertie replied. He looked at her, eyes softer now. "You know, when I was on that table, right after the surgery, I remember hearing a voice. I thought it was a dream." Bertie tilted her head. "What did it say?" "It said, 'Some lives are saved with medicine, others with mercy.'" Her breath caught. "That was you, wasn't it?" She smiled gently. "Maybe." He took a step closer. "If this goes our way, if Ivy comes home, we'll figure it out," she said, cutting him off with a certainty he hadn't expected. "Not you. Not I." Hugo nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting. Bertie reached for his hand, steady, warm, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. But everything important was already being said in the space between. A week passed. No word. Bertie checked her phone more times than she cared to admit, while brushing her teeth between rounds, even in the middle of conversations. Still nothing. No message from the court, no email, no envelope waiting at her door. Hugo had gone quiet, too. Not out of distance, but restraint, as if speaking hope aloud might jinx whatever was still teetering in the hands of fate. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Reverend Mason called. "It came," he said simply. Bertie didn't ask what. She was already grabbing her coat. By the time she reached the shelter, Hugo was standing under the back awning, the envelope held loose in his hand, unread. His hair was damp from the drizzle, and he looked like someone trying to stand still while everything inside him trembled. Bertie approached slowly, heart thudding. "You haven't opened it." He shook his head. "I thought maybe I should hear it out loud." Her throat tightened. "You want me to—" He handed her the envelope. She took it with steady fingers, even as her pulse kicked harder against her ribs. She tore the edge carefully, slipped the paper free. One line in bold, centered near the top. "Custodial reinstatement approved. Immediate reunification authorized." She looked up, eyes wide. "It's done," she whispered. "You did it." Hugo didn't speak. He just stepped back a little, like the words hadn't landed yet, like he couldn't believe them even if they were printed in ink. "You did it, Hugo," Bertie repeated. "You get to bring her home." He let out a breath that sounded more like a sob, then covered his face with both hands and just stayed there, still, shaking, silent. Bertie reached out, placed a hand on his arm. "Hey." He dropped his hands and looked at her. There were tears, but they weren't fragile. They were full, alive. "I don't know how to do this," he said, voice raw. "I don't know how to be what she needs every day." "She doesn't need perfection," Bertie replied. "She needs you, the you who fought for her." Hugo stepped forward, gently wrapping her in a hug that didn't ask for anything. It just held. It just said thank you in a way no words could. Later that evening, the shelter held a small gathering. Nothing formal, just cocoa and cookies in the common room, chairs pulled into a circle, Ivy on a quilt near the fireplace with her stuffed rabbit in one hand and a crown of paper flowers on her head. She didn't know yet, not officially. She just thought tonight was family night. When Hugo entered, Ivy lit up like a sparkler. "Daddy!" He crouched down, arms wide. "Hey, little fox!" She bounded into him, and Bertie had to look away for a moment just to breathe. Hugo pulled a tiny hand-carved box from his jacket pocket. Opened it. Inside was the heart, finished, polished. A small metal loop attached so it could hang from a ribbon or necklace. He held it out. "Remember this?" Ivy's eyes widened. "You finished it." "I did, and I want you to keep it. As a promise." "What kind of promise?" "That from now on I don't just visit." Ivy blinked, confused. Hugo glanced toward Bertie, who nodded once. "I get to take you home," he said softly. For a second, Ivy didn't move, just stared. Then, in a burst of joy, she threw her arms around his neck and squealed, "I knew it! I knew it! I knew it!" Bertie felt her chest splinter and rebuild in the same second. Reverend Mason stepped up beside her. "She waited without doubting," he said. "That's a kind of faith most grown people never hold on to." Bertie nodded, blinking fast. After the cookies had dwindled and the laughter softened into music, Hugo found Bertie near the window, sipping tea someone had handed her and forgotten. He stood beside her in the glow of string lights, both of them watching Ivy draw something by the fire. "I was going to leave town the day I got discharged," he said suddenly. Bertie turned. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to owe anyone. Didn't want to face what I'd left behind." She was quiet, waiting. "But then you showed up," he continued, "with the truth, with your patience, and you didn't make me feel like a project." "You never were," she said. "I know that now." He looked at her, and this time the quiet wasn't heavy. It was deliberate. "There's something else," he said. Her brows lifted. "More surprises? I've been offered a job, running a small operations team at a nonprofit here in Asheville, health tech integration for community shelters." Her smile grew slowly. "That sounds perfect." "I told them I needed time to make sure it wouldn't interfere with Ivy's adjustment, but the hours are flexible and it keeps us rooted." Bertie nodded, heart swelling. "I want to build a life she can see grow around her," he added. "Not just hand her a new chapter, build it with her." Then, softer still, "Maybe even with someone else too, if she'll stay." Bertie looked down, then up. "You asking?" "I'm saying, this doesn't have to end with the judge's decision. It can start there." She reached for his hand again. That same calloused warmth. Familiar now. Steady. "Then let's start slow," she said. "But let's start." And just like that, the weight shifted. Hope didn't just live in courtrooms or custody letters. It lived in the quiet, persistent choices to keep showing up. The scent of fresh paint lingered in the old community center like something hopeful. Bertie stood at the back of the multi-purpose room, clipboard in hand, watching as volunteers strung lights across the ceiling beams and unfolded rows of chairs. The afternoon sun spilled through the windows, turning the hardwood floors gold. "Looks like we might actually pull this off," Rosie said, appearing beside her with a roll of tape and a half-eaten apple. "Remind me why we agreed to help coordinate a donor showcase again?" Bertie asked, only half joking. "Because when your maybe boyfriend pitches an idea to transform the old clinic wing into a community outreach and recovery center, and then gets the city to consider funding it, you show up." Bertie smiled. "It's more than a pitch now. It's a movement." Rosie nudged her. "So is this." Bertie looked at her, confused. "This?" "You, him, Ivy, whatever you're building. You might want to start using words for it soon." Before Bertie could reply, the back door creaked open, and Hugo stepped inside. Dressed in worn jeans, a clean navy sweater, and that same nervous smile he always wore when entering rooms he used to avoid. Ivy trailed behind him, proudly carrying a small basket of homemade thank-you cards. She spotted Bertie and sprinted over, arms wide. "I put glitter on yours." "Of course you did," Bertie laughed, kneeling down. "The good kind or the kind that stays on me for 3 weeks?" "Both." Hugo chuckled as he approached, hands tucked into his pockets. She insisted. Bertie stood, their eyes meeting. "How are you holding up?" she asked. He took a slow breath. Like someone who's about to speak to a room full of donors and officials and has no idea if his voice will work. "It will. I haven't spoken in public in over 4 years." "You've spoken in rooms that mattered more," she said, "like the one with Ivy." His expression softened. "That's true." Reverend Mason arrived a few minutes later, clipboard in hand, tie crooked. "They're all here," he announced. "City council, local nonprofits, even the mayor's assistant. You ready?" Hugo didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Ivy, who was now arranging her cards on a display table like they were precious artifacts. Then he looked at Bertie. "I've never been more ready." The room filled quickly. People mingled around coffee urns and cookie trays. City officials shook hands. A violinist played softly from the corner. And then Reverend Mason stepped up to the mic. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Tonight isn't just about proposals or projects. It's about stories, about what happens when someone decides to come back, to rebuild, not just their life, but the lives around them." He stepped aside. Hugo approached the mic, the room quieting with each step. Bertie held her breath. "I used to believe that when something broke," Hugo began, voice steady but quiet, "you had 2 options. You either fixed it immediately, or you walked away." Somewhere in the back, someone shifted in their seat. No one else moved. "I chose the second," he said. "I lost my wife. And instead of standing in the grief with my daughter, I ran. I thought disappearing was the same thing as protecting her." He paused. It wasn't. His eyes moved across the crowd but landed on Bertie. "It took one person, one nurse, one act of selfless kindness to remind me that hiding isn't healing, and that forgiveness doesn't come wrapped in perfection. It comes when you choose to show up again and again, even when you're scared." He nodded toward Ivy, who beamed from her seat near the front. "That little girl believed in me long before I deserved it. So now I want to build something that believes in others the same way. A space for fathers trying to return, for mothers rebuilding, for people who've lost their voices but not their worth." Applause broke slowly, then grew into something bigger, real. Bertie wiped a tear from the corner of her eye but didn't hide it. Afterward, donors mingled with shelter board members. Questions were asked. Checks were offered. Hugo moved through the room like someone learning how to carry joy without dropping it. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low, Hugo found Bertie outside on the front steps, arms wrapped around herself. "You were right," he said softly. "About what?" My voice worked. She turned, smiling. "Told you." He stepped beside her, slipping his hand into hers without hesitation. "I want to do this right," he said after a long pause. "Not just the center, not just being Ivy's dad. I want to do us right. If there's an us to build." Bertie leaned her head against his shoulder. "There's an us. It's been growing this whole time." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it for weeks. "I was thinking of naming the center after her," he added. "Ivy?" He nodded. "But not just her name. Her hope. Her belief that no matter how far you go, you can still come back." Bertie closed her eyes. "That's exactly what it should be called." He smiled, holding her hand a little tighter. "Then let's build it," he whispered. And under the soft hum of evening lights and leftover music, they stood in the middle of something new. No longer running, no longer waiting, just ready. The soft clatter of dishes and the hum of a low jazz record filled the kitchen as steam curled up from the pot on the stove. Bertie leaned over the counter, stirring something fragrant. Her sleeves rolled up and a smile tucked gently into the corners of her mouth. The window above the sink was cracked open, letting in the cool spring breeze and the far-off laughter of a little girl chasing fireflies in the backyard. "She's been out there for almost an hour," Hugo said as he stepped into the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. "I don't think she's coming in until she catches one." "She said she needs 3, Bertie replied, still stirring. "One for her, one for you, and one for her mama." Hugo stilled for a moment, just long enough for her to glance up and notice the quiet hit of emotion behind his eyes. "She says things like that sometimes," he said, "out of nowhere, like she still talks to Lauren in her head." Bertie turned off the stove and moved the pot off the burner. "Maybe she does." Hugo nodded, folding the towel carefully. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time." "None of us do," Bertie said, "but you're doing it. That's what matters." He crossed the room slowly, coming to stand beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch. "You ever think about how strange it is," he murmured, "how something as simple as a blood donation turned into all of this?" Bertie laughed softly. "Not strange, just meant." "I didn't think I'd get this," he said after a pause. "A home again. A family. You." She looked up at him. "You didn't just get it, Hugo. You built it. You fought for it." He leaned in then, forehead resting lightly against hers, the quiet between them filled with the scent of rosemary and the weight of everything they'd been through to get here. Outside, Ivy's voice rang out. "I got one. Daddy, look!" They stepped out onto the porch just as she came running up the steps, cupping her hands together. "It's glowing," she whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "Just like I thought it would." Bertie knelt down. "You're going to have to let it go soon. Fireflies don't shine if you hold them too long." "I know," Ivy said, her voice soft. "But I just wanted you both to see it first." Hugo crouched beside them, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You know what this reminds me of?" "What?" "That bench we built, remember?" Ivy nodded. "Every time I look at it," he said, "I think about second chances, and how sometimes they're shaped with rough wood and messy edges, but they still hold." Bertie looked at them, heart so full it ached. Later, after Ivy had gone to bed with the firefly set free just outside her window, Bertie stepped into the living room to find Hugo sitting with a small wooden box in his hands. The same one he'd carried since the day he first showed Ivy the finished heart. He looked up as she entered. "I have something for you," he said quietly. Bertie crossed the room slowly, sitting beside him on the couch. "I know this isn't a proposal," he said, nervous, fingers brushing the edge of the lid, "but it's a promise." He opened the box. Inside was another carved heart, smaller than Ivy's but shaped the same. Only this one had 2 initials burned into the side, B+I. Bertie blinked. "B and I?" "Bertie and Ivy," Hugo said. "Because she wouldn't be sleeping in that room right now if it weren't for you. And neither would I." Tears welled before she could stop them. "You didn't have to." "I needed to," he interrupted gently. "Because love isn't just about what we feel. It's about what we choose to carry. And you carried us when I didn't know how." She reached into the box and closed her fingers around the heart. "I've never been given anything like this," she whispered. "You've earned everything like this," he replied. Bertie leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The house was quiet, save for the soft creak of the trees in the wind and the occasional sleepy turn of Ivy in the next room. They sat like that for a long time. No rush, no fear, just the quiet confidence of something that had survived, of something that wasn't perfect, but was finally beautifully whole. The morning of the first Ivy Hope Day dawned warm and bright, the kind of spring light that made everything look newer than it was. A soft breeze tugged at the banners strung between trees in the community garden courtyard, each one hand-painted by volunteers and kids from the neighborhood, flapping like little flags of resilience. Bertie stood under the archway just outside the main entrance to the new Ivy Hope Community Center, heart full, clipboard forgotten by her side. She watched as families trickled in. Some she knew from the hospital, others from the shelter, many from the quiet corners of Asheville that too often got overlooked. There were smiles, laughter, people planting flowers, hugging neighbors, sharing stories. It wasn't just an event. It felt like something blooming. Rosie nudged her from behind. "It's happening, Bea. You see this?" "I see it," Bertie said, barely above a whisper, "and I still can't believe it." Rosie crossed her arms. "I can. You kept showing up, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." Bertie blinked against sudden tears. At the edge of the courtyard, Ivy twirled in a new sundress, the skirt catching wind like a kite. Her hands were covered in paint, her cheeks smudged pink with joy. Hugo stood nearby, helping a young boy plant a sapling. Every few seconds he'd glance toward Ivy, like he still needed to check she was real. He caught Bertie's eye across the garden and smiled. Later that afternoon, a small stage had been set up, simple and bare under the tall pines. A microphone, 2 folding chairs, a crowd gathered on picnic blankets and benches. Reverend Mason gave the welcome, voice carrying like gospel through the hush. This center, he said, was built on something stronger than money. It was built on the stubborn, quiet belief that people, when given a second chance, can rise, not alone, together. He stepped aside, and Hugo took the stage. He looked different now, not polished, not formal, just rooted. "I used to think that healing meant going backward," he began, "fixing what was broken, rewinding, undoing." He paused, eyes flicking across the crowd to where Bertie and Ivy sat side by side. "But I learned that healing is not about going back. It's about moving forward with the pieces you still have, and building something that honors what you lost." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the wooden heart Ivy had once drawn as a dream, now a real pendant hanging from a cord. "This place is for the ones who almost gave up, the ones who thought they were too far gone, the ones who were waiting for someone to say, 'You're still here. You still matter.'" The applause was soft at first, but grew, rippling outward like something breaking open. Bertie watched as Ivy climbed the steps and stood beside him, holding his hand like she'd always known it belonged to her. That evening, after the sun dipped low and the lights came on overhead, Bertie wandered through the garden paths, letting the laughter fade behind her, her feet crunching over soft gravel. She found herself standing in front of the bench, their bench, the one built from rough wood and hard days. She sat. It still creaked a little, still leaned ever so slightly to one side, but it held. "Hey," came Hugo's voice, gentle and warm as he joined her. She looked over. "Hey." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I've been working on this," he said. "Not just for you, for us." Bertie unfolded the cloth slowly. It was a small sculpture, carved from oak, delicate in shape, a nurse's hand holding a child's. The child's hand was offering a tiny heart. Bertie didn't speak for a long time, just let the emotion gather behind her ribs and bloom. "I didn't know how to say thank you," Hugo said, "or I love you, or both." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "That says it." They sat there in silence, the kind that didn't need to fill space, only hold it. "I was thinking," Bertie whispered after a long pause, "maybe next year we don't just celebrate Ivy Hope Day here. Maybe we take it to other cities, other shelters. Let people know what's possible." Hugo nodded. "A legacy. More like a ripple." He looked at her. "I like that." Bertie leaned her head on his shoulder, eyes drifting closed for a moment. "You gave blood," he said softly, "but you also gave me back everything I thought I'd lost." She smiled. "You didn't come back for money. You came back for her. And I stayed. For you." Bertie let the words settle, let them echo inside. As the stars blinked on overhead and Ivy's laughter danced somewhere nearby, Bertie breathed in deeply. She had once believed healing came only in hospitals, in IV drips and steady beeps. But now she knew. Healing could come in the form of a little girl's drawing, a bench that wobbled but held, a man who chose to stay, and a nurse who gave a drop of blood, and found a life stitched back together by love. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thoughts matter to me either way.